Lee Marvin names the 7 actors he hated most. Until his very last breath, Lee Marvin, the screen legend of the 1950s and 60s, the last surviving soldier of Hollywood, held onto a personal blacklist 7 people he'd rather fire his final bullet at than ever see again. Throughout his career, Marvin was never the polished heartthrob or crowd-pleasing star. He lived the way a soldier lives, blunt as a rifle barrel and honest to the point of discomfort. On set, the mere presence of anyone from that hated list could make him smash a whiskey glass, hurl his hat to the floor, or even walk off a role mid-shoot. Off set, his words were even sharper. I'd rather hang up my gun and disappear from the screen than share a frame with a phony hero. The irony. Those 7 names were no nobodies. They were celebrated stars, trusted co-stars, even drinking buddies after a long day on set. That's what keeps the mystery alive. Was it just the wounded pride of a legend, the jealousy of a man who'd walked through hell, or a clue to the darker secrets Hollywood has always tried to hide? Lee Marvin was born in 1924 in New York into a family with a long and proud military tradition flowing in its veins. When World War II erupted, young Marvin chose the battlefield over the classroom. He dropped out of school, enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps, and was deployed straight to the Pacific Front. During the brutal Battle of Saipan, he was severely wounded by machine gun fire, suffered serious sciatic nerve damage, and spent over a year in the hospital. In return, he was awarded the Purple Heart, the clearest proof of the blood and bone he left behind in that earthly hell. It was there, perhaps, that Lee Marvin's character was forged straight as a bullet, tough as steel, and unwilling to bow to anything. Unlike many Hollywood stars who only wore military uniforms on screen, Marvin lived the war where mudblood and the scream of bullets were not props. He crawled through trenches on the razor's edge between life and death, watched comrades fall right beside him, and carried those scars for the rest of his life. That brutal reality shaped him into an actor who didn't need to act at all. Every fierce glare, every clenched jaw on screen was drawn from memory, not from technique. When the war ended, Marvin didn't march straight onto the red carpet. He drifted through odd jobs, living quietly like a ghost until fate intervened. An actor suddenly fell ill, and Marvin was called in as a last-minute replacement. With no training and no preparation, he exploded the moment he stepped into the spotlight. His towering frame, icy stare, and raw, untamed energy held audiences captive. In that instant, Marvin knew he was born to be in front of the camera. From obscure supporting roles, Marvin quickly became the secret weapon every director wanted. In The Big Heat 1953, he played a vicious gangster who sent chills down Hollywood's spine. In Bad Day at Black Rock 1955, a single glance from him could tighten the air like a drawn bowstring. By the 1960s, Marvin had fully ascended into legend. In The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance 1962, he turned the outlaw Liberty Valance into such a powerful villain that audiences remembered him more vividly than even John Wayne or James Stewart. 3 years later, he stunned the world again in Cat Ballou 1965, portraying 2 polar opposite roles, a drunken wreck and a cold-blooded killer, and walked away with the Academy Award for Best Actor. Yet that same grit and uncompromising nature made Marvin something of an outsider in the glittering world of Hollywood. He despised fakery, loathed those who cloaked themselves in fame while disrespecting the craft. And so, throughout his career, he crossed 7 names off his life. People he would never shake hands with, never share a frame with, and never even look at twice. At the top of that blacklist was none other than the legendary Burt Lancaster. 1. Burt Lancaster, Clash of the Titans. If 1960s Hollywood had a secret arena where egos collided with maximum force. Its center would be these two men, Lee Marvin, the wild, battle-hardened soldier who lived every inch of himself, and Burt Lancaster, the born star, overflowing with confidence and convinced he was destined to lead all of Hollywood. They weren't natural enemies. In fact, there was a time when people expected them to become the golden duo of action and war films. But the truth is, simple two suns can't shine in the same sky. The feud didn't start with a fight, it started with a dream of Hollywood. A major studio wanted to create an unbeatable pair, Marvin's raw, storm-like intensity, paired with Lancaster's deep, powerful acting. But just before the contract was signed, Lancaster coldly refused. His reasons stunned the industry. Marvin doesn't have the depth to carry a complex psychological role. That sentence was like a bullet straight into the pride of a man who had crawled through mud gunpowder and the bodies of his comrades. Marvin didn't stay silent. At a press conference weeks later, he set his whiskey glass down, looked straight into the camera, and fired back, "I don't need to pretend to be deep like he does. I just need to act real." From that moment, Hollywood stopped being a place where they could coexist. It became a battlefield of silent strikes, each man finding ways to wound the other without firing a shot. Rumors spread that Lancaster, using his influence quietly, pressured a studio to cut Marvin's role in a major project. When Marvin found out he didn't rage, he simply withdrew from the film the next morning, leaving millions of dollars on the table. Not long after, when offered another project with Lancaster, he turned it down with a single line: "If Lancaster's in the film, I'm not." But the war didn't stop at the studio gates. At lavish Hollywood parties, Lancaster would pretend not to see Marvin, and once even sneered in front of mutual friends. Some people act like they're shouting at the audience because they have nothing else to show. The comment hung in the air like a stray bullet, and everyone knew exactly who it was aimed at. Marvin didn't respond immediately. He simply raised his whiskey glass, took a slow sip, then turned to those same friends, his eyes as sharp as a blade. Maybe that's because I did shout. On the battlefield, not on a stage. From that moment, this was no longer professional rivalry. It was a war of honor, a grudge that could never be settled. People say that once, when Marvin walked into a major Academy event, Lancaster quietly left the room just minutes later, not because he was busy, but because he didn't want to breathe the same air. According to one veteran producer, if Burt was in dressing room number 1, Lee would never set foot inside. Studios would rather lose millions than put them in the same frame. In a world where everyone shakes hands to survive, Marvin and Lancaster chose to live as mortal enemies, and every time one man's name was mentioned, the other's eyes turned cold, as if standing once more in a blood-soaked trench. The Cold War between Marvin and Lancaster might have been icy and calculated, but compared to what came next, it was still a gentle duel. Because after Lancaster, Marvin faced a completely different kind of hostility, not born from arrogance or intellect, but from sheer carelessness and indifference. If Lancaster drove him mad with ego, Robert Mitchum would push him over the edge for one much simpler reason: an absolute lack of respect for the craft of acting. 2. Robert Mitchum, the idolized slacker. Mitchum was a great talent, no one could deny that. His rugged good looks, devil-may-care attitude, and effortless cool made him one of the most magnetic men ever to grace the screen. But it was precisely that effortless attitude that made Lee Marvin want to throw a punch every time he saw the man walk onto a set. From day one, Marvin was infuriated by Mitchum's behavior, showing up drunk, not knowing his lines, and openly admitting he didn't care. During one crucial scene, while the entire crew was waiting for the cue, Mitchum fell asleep right there on set. Marvin didn't say a word. He walked over and slapped Mitchum across the face hard enough to snap him awake. The entire crew froze. "Wake up," Marvin growled. "This is a film set, not a bar." But instead of sobering Mitchum up, the slap only added fuel to their simmering fire. At a Hollywood Hills party, a drunken Mitchum hurled a glass at the wall after Marvin called him a lazy man worshipped like a god. And Mitchum didn't stop at insults. On set during a critical scene, he deliberately changed his lines as the cameras rolled, ruining Marvin's performance and forcing the entire crew to reshoot. To Marvin, this wasn't just unprofessional. It was a blatant knife in the back. The atmosphere on set turned to ice. Everyone stood frozen while Marvin remained silent, a silence so heavy it felt like a bullet chambered and ready to fire. Then suddenly he hurled his script to the floor, pages scattering like shrapnel. "You think this is a joke?" he roared, voice hoarse with fury and contempt. "Dozens of people are working their asses off, hundreds of hours wasted, all because of one man who doesn't respect this craft." No one had ever seen Marvin lose his temper like that. He stepped right up to Mitchum, eyes burning holes through the man's smug indifference. "You want to sabotage the film? Fine, but don't expect me to forgive you. Ever." After that day, Marvin refused to speak to Mitchum, not a word, not a glance, not even a hello. Producers stopped daring to put them in the same project. One recalled that if Marvin saw Mitchum's name on a cast list, he'd throw the script on the table and walk out without a word. If Lancaster was a knife to Marvin's pride, Mitchum was a punch to his very belief in the craft of acting. And after that clash, Marvin didn't just despise Mitchum, he despised the entire system that had turned a man he saw as lazy and careless into a so-called legend. But Mitchum wasn't the last to make Marvin grit his teeth at Hollywood's machinery. Because there was another Hollywood legend whom Marvin chose to cut ties with, none other than famous actor John Wayne. 3. John Wayne, the hero who never went to war. John Wayne, the name forever tied to the image of the American hero, cowboy hat, proud stance, and an unflinching smile in the face of danger. Millions of Americans once saw him as the embodiment of masculinity, the pride of an entire generation. But to Lee Marvin, it was all one giant performance. Marvin, who had crawled through trenches, heard bullets scream past his ears, and carried the bodies of fallen comrades on his back, could never stomach a hero who had never actually held a real gun. Wayne never enlisted. When World War II broke out, he stayed in Hollywood, dodged the draft, and continued building his image as an unbreakable soldier through safe scripted scenes behind a camera. To Marvin, that wasn't just hypocrisy, it was a personal insult. On the set of the Comancheros, the air was as heavy as the calm before a storm. Cameras stood silent. The crew waited, but what they were about to witness wasn't in the script. John Wayne, the bigger star, the man America worshipped as an icon, walked up to Marvin and, half joking but half commanding, said, "Lee, you're stealing the frame. Tone down the intensity. Let the audience see me." A few awkward laughs broke the tension, but Marvin didn't laugh. He stared at Wayne for a long moment, not with the eyes of an actor playing a cowboy, but with the eyes of a man who had crawled through blood-soaked trenches and picked up the bodies of friends under fire. Then suddenly he removed his cowboy hat and hurled it to the floor. The sharp thud echoed in the suffocating silence. Marvin walked slowly toward Wayne, stopping just close enough for everyone on set to hear his breath. Then he spoke, not loudly, but with a chill that made spines stiffen. "You might play a soldier better than I do, but you will never know the smell of mud, the taste of blood, or the sound of bullets tearing over your head." No one dared say a word. The cameraman later recalled he could hear the clock ticking after that line. Wayne stood there, his smile frozen as if someone had just ripped open a secret he'd hidden his entire career. They still finished the film, still shook hands on the red carpet, still posed for photos side by side as if nothing had happened. But in Marvin's eyes, Wayne died. In that moment, died as a man he could ever respect. From that day on, they were no longer two actors sharing a film, they were two entirely different worlds. On one side was a man who had lain in blood-soaked trenches and understood the true cost of survival. On the other was someone who built his heroism from lines of dialogue and stage lights. No more polite greetings, no more small talk. Between them stretched an invisible gulf, not a few feet of soundstage, but a chasm carved out of trust and dignity. Marvin once told close friends during a drunken night, "I'd rather hang up my gun and walk away from the screen than share a frame with a fake hero." And he kept his word. For the rest of his life, there wasn't a single scene, a single project, a single moment where Lee Marvin had to swallow that contempt. Yet if Wayne represented false heroism painted to look noble, then at the other end of the spectrum was a kind of person Marvin despised even more. Someone who believed fame gave them the right to trample over every principle. And no one embodied that more than Frank Sinatra, a star so big he thought entire film crews should orbit around him, a king of Hollywood, whom Marvin once admitted. "Just hearing his name is enough to make my blood boil." 4. Frank Sinatra, the king of ego. If Lee Marvin ever truly hated someone down to his bones, that someone was Frank Sinatra, legendary singer, box office titan, American icon, and to Marvin, the living embodiment of Hollywood's most rotten ego. Marvin's contempt wasn't about Sinatra's talent. He never denied the man's golden voice or magnetic charm, but about the star's arrogance, which often crossed the line into outright disrespect. Sinatra was notorious for showing up late, leaving early, and demanding that entire film crews bend to his schedule. But one time he pushed things too far. The clash began even before cameras rolled during negotiations for a project they were supposed to work on together. That day, the entire crew waited for nearly half a day. The set lights grew hot, the script was ready, but Sinatra, the king of Hollywood, was nowhere to be found. When he finally arrived 5 hours late, there was no apology. Just a lazy glance, a cigarette dangling from his lips, and a line so icy it froze the room. "Hope you've all been waiting long enough." It didn't stop there. In the middle of shooting, Sinatra simply walked off, tossing over his shoulder. "Not feeling the vibe today." For Lee Marvin, a man who had crawled through battlefield mud and treated professionalism like life or death, that was the final straw. He stormed toward Sinatra, eyes blazing. Some crew members later claimed that if 3 people hadn't held him back, Marvin would have thrown the first punch right there. But his fury didn't end on set. In 1966, at a Hollywood party, someone casually mentioned Sinatra's name. Marvin slammed his whiskey glass onto the table so hard it shattered shards flying and growled each word into the stunned silence. Frank thinks the world owes him a standing ovation. But he's never done a damn thing to deserve it. Hollywood had never heard anyone talk about Sinatra like that. And of course, Sinatra wasn't one to let it slide. Later, he reportedly sneered in front of a crowd that mutt in uniform thinks he's noble just because he survived a war. The remark spread like wildfire, and with it, any hope of collaboration went up in flames. From potential co-stars, they became sworn enemies. Then came the final blow. Sinatra, originally cast as the lead in The Dirty Dozen, suddenly dropped out just before filming began. The official reasons: scheduling conflicts. But Hollywood buzzed with another version. Sinatra didn't want to share the screen with a real veteran, someone who he knew would make him look small. From that point on, Marvin never spoke Sinatra's name with respect again. To him, Frank wasn't a king of music or a screen legend as the public adored. He was just an arrogant man living in a bubble of fame, a world where everyone revolved around his ego. And when asked if he ever regretted their feud, Marvin's reply was cold, almost mocking. "I've faced machine guns and survived. But when I face Frank Sinatra, I feel absolutely nothing." While Marvin's relationship with Sinatra was a fiery clash of oversized egos, there was another figure, a young cowboy whom Marvin believed had stolen the spotlight without ever breaking a real sweat. And that name was Clint Eastwood. 5. Clint Eastwood. Two alpha wolves can't share the same pack. When Clint Eastwood rose to stardom in the late 1960s, Hollywood had changed. It was no longer a place for men who had survived bombs, bullets, and battle scars. It had become a playground for cool guys who knew how to stand in the right spot and deliver the right line. And to Lee Marvin, a man who had crawled through mud, dragged the bodies of his fallen brothers, and survived the sound of gunfire that felt like an insult to the craft. On the set of Paint Your Wagon, 1969, tensions flared over even the smallest things. While Marvin approached every scene with the seriousness of a soldier heading into battle, Eastwood strolled onto set calm, quiet, and seemingly without effort. One day, as the crew discussed the script, Marvin glanced at Eastwood, fixing his hair in the mirror, and fired off a cold remark that made the entire set hold its breath. "A real cowboy doesn't comb his hair before a gunfight." What seemed like a harmless quip was actually a slap at Eastwood's carefully cultivated, cool cowboy image. But the tension didn't end there. Behind the scenes, Marvin often mocked Eastwood for never having lived a single day like the men he plays, while Eastwood avoided direct confrontation, occasionally joking to close friends. Some people still live in the past and die there. Those who worked on Paint Your Wagon said the atmosphere was so tense it felt ready to explode. Two men, two icons of Hollywood, and neither willing to back down. Each was an alpha wolf determined to lead the pack. The shoot wrapped, the film premiered, but they never appeared together in another project again. To Marvin, Eastwood wasn't evil. He was simply the embodiment of a Hollywood he no longer recognized, a place where real scars had been replaced by flawless makeup and memories of war were drowned out by studio lights. For Eastwood, the clash might have been a generational difference. But Marvin couldn't stand people who lived solely to be admired. And soon, in the dazzling glare of Hollywood, another man appeared, one whose every step was calculated, a man for whom acting was merely an excuse to feed his own ego. That man was Yul Briner. 6. Yul Briner, the king of the spotlight. Briner wasn't just an actor. He was a phenomenon in Hollywood. A man who treated every film like a coronation ceremony. On set, he didn't demand more direction or script changes. What he demanded was light, precise, to the very angle, to the point where every shot had to feature its own beam shining dramatically on his perfectly polished bald head to highlight his presence. When a director complained about delays, Briner simply shrugged. "The audience comes here to see me." Marvin, who believed acting should come from truth sweat, and even the scars of war, just smirked. "I thought this was a film, not a lighting show." Their tension escalated quickly. During one casting session, Briner refused to shake Marvin's hand and coolly said, "You'll learn how to stand behind me." That wasn't sarcasm, it was a declaration of war. A few years later, Marvin was offered the lead role in a major blockbuster. His name was already on the contract. But when he heard Briner was also cast, Marvin said nothing. He simply signed his withdrawal papers within 48 hours. For him, no role was worth standing in the shadow of a man who valued spotlight over substance. From that point on, they avoided each other like mortal enemies. Marvin's scathing remarks about Briner spread across Hollywood. He doesn't act. He just stands there waiting for the light to hit him. And every time Marvin said it, Briner demanded more light, more spotlight, as if Marvin's disdain only fueled his desire to shine brighter. Their rivalry never ended. Marvin rejected every project that included Briner, while Briner took Marvin's withdrawals as proof that he had won their ego war. But to Marvin, the only real victory was never bowing to artifice. Marvin could scoff at Briner's inflated ego hidden beneath a halo of stage lights, but he still respected the man's talent. Tony Curtis, however, inspired pure rage in him. Because in Marvin's eyes, Curtis had nothing but a handsome face and a few sugary lines. And that wasn't acting. It was a con. 7. Tony Curtis, the lounge act pretty boy. Tony Curtis was the poster child of glamorous Hollywood slick hair, a smile bright enough to light a room, and romantic roles that made audiences swoon. But to Lee Marvin, it was all just a shiny coat of paint hiding weakness underneath. He never bothered to hide his contempt. In a 1960s talk show, when asked about Curtis, Marvin shot back with trademark sarcasm. Tony Curtis might survive Hollywood, but he wouldn't last 5 minutes in a real fight. That joke was Marvin's way of exposing what he despised while he poured battlefield memories into every role. Curtis just showed up on set with expensive cologne and a few sugar-sweet lines. During a joint promotional shoot, Marvin couldn't resist saying it straight. He sprays on more perfume than the blood I've spilled on the battlefield. From that moment, the tension between them was palpable. When a major studio proposed they co-star in a blockbuster, Marvin responded with 3 impossible demands: replace the director, rewrite the script, and add more fight scenes to expose the weakling. Curtis, furious when he heard, walked away, and the project collapsed within weeks. But the feud didn't stop there. At a studio party, a tipsy Curtis mocked Marvin in front of a laughing crowd. Some people have to shout just to get attention, maybe because they have nothing else but the shouting. Marvin, hearing this from across the room, calmly approached, looked Curtis dead in the eye, and replied cold as steel. "Maybe because I once shouted to stay alive, and you've never known what it means to fight." From that night on, they were sworn enemies. Curtis refused to mention Marvin in interviews, while Marvin called Curtis the perfect symbol of a film industry dying from its obsession with appearances. To Marvin, Curtis's existence wasn't just a personal insult. It was living proof of everything he despised about Hollywood, a place where people were celebrated not for talent or authenticity, but for pretty faces and empty words. Looking back at the 7 names Lee Marvin called out, you'll see box office legends, genre-defining icons, even kings of the silver screen. Yet to Marvin, they all shared one unforgivable trait: arrogance so bloated they thought the whole world should orbit around them. Fakery so deep they forgot what authenticity looked like on film. Selfishness so ruthless they'd trample over their peers just to stand in the spotlight. And above all, they treated acting not as a mission to live and die for, but as a stairway to fame and glory. Marvin was no saint himself. He was hot-tempered, rough-edged, brutally honest, and sometimes said things that left all of Hollywood stunned. But that was the price of living truthfully. In a world where every smile could be a lie and every handshake might hide a knife, Marvin chose to live like a soldier, walk straight, shoot straight, and never pretend to like someone just to be liked back. In August 1987, Lee Marvin drew his final breath at the age of 63 after a heart attack. He was laid to rest with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery, not as a Hollywood star, but as a soldier returning to rest among the comrades who had fallen on the battlefields of Saipan decades before. And perhaps that image, a soldier lying silently among rows of white headstones, says everything about the man he was. He didn't just leave behind dozens of iconic roles or films that became part of American cinema history. He left behind something far deeper, the legacy of a man who never compromised with falsehood, never bowed before glamour, and never shook the hand of someone he despised. In a world where everything can be polished and packaged, Lee Marvin chose to live in the rawest, most unfiltered way, willing to be hated, willing to be misunderstood, as long as he remained true to himself. And it was that very honesty, the kind so many are afraid to show, that made him a legend.